Guys, it's Deja, aka So Anxious, and today's video is going to be a guide to problem solving if you're having any interior lighting issues. When I first started Revit, I did have problems with having very dim lighting or having pitch black renderings. This issue can come about when you don't really know how to manipulate the settings. One, to encourage light flow, and then two, to allow Revit to understand where you are and what you want the system to do in order to help you. So I'm going to give you guys 5 tips on how to problem solve any lighting issues you may have. The first one is going to be to avoid total lack of lighting implementation. The second is to choose your scheme of light display. The third is to adjust the image exposure. Fourth is adjusting the light bulb light loss factor. And 5, to check the artificial light dimming spectrum. So let's get started. I'm going to use a room from a residential project I was working on not too long ago. All the interior designs are decorated as far as materials, textures, color, etc. So when we go to render this, we are expecting to have a pretty lifelike image. One thing to know during this process is if at all any percentage towards the left of the screen is completed for the rendering and your image is still pitch black, it's not going to change at all, so you don't want to waste time on waiting for the process to complete. Go ahead and exit out of that screen so we can start to figure out what the problems may be. So once we go back to the line work, we're going to come to our tip number 1, and that is to avoid lack of lighting implementation. Yes, I have all the necessary furniture for a bedroom here, but I do not have any artificial lights or any natural lighting such as windows or maybe a crack in the wall or anything like that that will influence any type of brightness to enter into the space. So we are going to put in some natural lighting right now, which would be a rectangular awning window behind the bed. Once we render this, as you can see, something is visible in the image, but it's just the window. None of the light actually spans into the room. So I'm going to bring you to tip number 2, and that is to choose the scheme of display. Revit does not always know where you are in the project, and even though once you press render, everything that is existent in the project will render, that isn't the same with light transfer. So anytime you start a new project, you may notice that the scheme is on exterior sun only. At all times, it's just automatically chosen, but we are in the inside currently, so let's scroll down and go to interior sun only. Once we do this, the rendering becomes way brighter. You're able to identify the bed, the dresser, the closet, etc. It's still pretty dark though. This isn't something that you would send to anybody to review or put on a project. So we're going to go on to tip number 3, and that is to adjust the image exposure. This is located on the same menu bar to the left and towards the bottom. Once you click on that, you're going to get a number of spectrums to play with. I usually stay on the very top one, which is the exposure value, and I move that on to the left to bright. It's automatically usually in the middle, so you're going to want to move that more to the left if you are having lack of lighting issues. If it's too much light, move that to the right. Once we do this, there is a big difference. One thing you should know is this is like changing the hue in Photoshop. It pulls in a lot of the light and makes more contrast, but you can overdo it and whitewash or overly saturate the image. So this is an example of that, but I'm going to go back to the original setting. So once I do this, let's go ahead and get rid of the window and focus on artificial lighting. I've now imported a floor lamp and some recessed ceiling lights. We're going to go ahead and render this as is. Once you do that, at a certain percentage, you see that it is still pitch black, but it's these little light spots towards the top, which are where the ceiling lights are placed. I have no idea why that is. Maybe it's Revit telling us that they know we have artificial lightings, but for some reason they're not able to shine. So in addressing this problem, we're going to go back to tip number 2 and change the scheme of the display. Remember, before we chose interior sun only, now let's do interior artificial only. Once that is done, the room does light up, but I still don't think that this is very presentable. It's too dark. It's really not visually legible to someone who doesn't understand the project as much as you do, especially from a distance. So we're gonna go on to tip number 4, and that is to change the light loss factors of the light bulbs. Coming out of here, what I do first is click on one of the lights, the recessed ceiling lights, and I go to the left where it gives you all the different specifications of the light. Go all the way to the top and it says edit type. Once you click on that, another menu of characteristics for that light type is going to pop up, such as the color of the light, the dimensions, the span. All of that you can manipulate to make the light do exactly what you want it to do. But all the way at the bottom, we're going to click on light loss factor. You have 2 different options, simple and advanced. I usually prefer the simple, but I do suggest you guys play with all of the qualities that are able to be changed. So if you guys do choose simple, for some reason it's usually towards the dimmer side automatically, but we're going to move that on to the right, which will make it brighter. The great thing about editing the type is that this influences all the lights that have the same makeup. So if you click on another one of the recessed lights and scroll to the bottom, that change will still be implemented. I'm going to do the same thing to the floor lamp. This definitely brightens up the room, and this is the tip I always kind of go for second after making sure the scheme is correct, because then you're changing the actual makeup of the model instead of having a temporary fix by changing the way the image is portrayed. So once you do this, we're going to go on to tip number 5, and that is to check the artificial light dimming spectrum. The reason why I say check is because it's usually always at its capacity. This is located towards the bottom of the rendering menu on the left. And once you click on that, there's going to be a whole list of all the lights that are placed in the model individually. So instead of like editing type when they're grouped together in the categories, each light is listed individually, which can be a plus for you. So I'm going to show you guys the difference between having it at its automatic highest capacity and then changing it from a value between 0 to 1. I'm going to change the light from 1 to 0.0. Once I do this, the light seems like it turned off, but at this point it's just really dim. So again, this is something that you want to check, because as you're clicking through and manipulating the settings, you may accidentally change something. Always make sure it's at its highest capacity of 1 if you're facing any darkness problems. But if a light is too strong, such as a pendant light or a strobe light, which are used on the outside of the buildings, you're going to want to do most of these tips in reverse, but especially this light dimming spectrum. Hit that first to see if that helps you out in softening the light intensity. So those are all 5 of my tips to help you guys problem solve when it comes to lighting issues you may have. Remember that some of the tips actually change how the model is made and will be transferred if you were to maybe download this project in other programs, while some of them are more temporary fixes to the image that's being displayed at the moment and not the entire project itself. So play with this and figure out what best works for you. If you guys have any other suggestions on how to improve your lighting display in Revit, please put that down in the comments for others to see. If you have any suggestions on future videos for me to record, as far as problem solving or tutorials, please let me know, and I'll see you guys next week.